Oh, no. We were all coordinated too. Look at us.
I know. Yeah, we are. Well, Claire, welcome back to the show. I was just on your show. I'm so excited to have you on the Hollyfield Nutrition Pod finally. Yeah, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, for people who don't know, can you tell them real quick, like who you are, what you do, and where you are located?
Yeah, my name's Claire Shorenstein. I'm a sports dietitian like Holly. Been doing this for over 11 years now, and I'm out in Aptos, California, part of Santa Cruz, in case you're not familiar. And my business is Eat for Endurance. I have a podcast like you were just on there. Excited to release that episode soon. And yeah, I work with all kinds of different active people, teenagers through, we were just talking about my 80-year-old marathoner.
Yes.
So I work with all age groups, all abilities. I do get a lot of endurance focused folks because I am an endurance athlete myself. I love to run out on the trails, do ultras, marathons, all that stuff. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, for people who are watching versus listening, like your background you said was a picture you took on a run.
Yes, this is my local
Gorgeous.
redwood forest,
Oh my
19
God.
marks, which I post about all the time. I'm usually, I mean, I do some neighborhood roads, but often I'm posting runs from my beach where I'm sea glass hunting, which I did this morning,
Yes.
a little passion of mine, or I will be in this beautiful forest if you're watching. And this was, yeah, Snap from the Run, which I love the sunbeams coming through. So if you're a client of mine ever, like you will see this is my Zoom background always because it's my happy place.
It would be mine too. Yeah, if I took that picture, absolutely. That's amazing. Well, what got you into like running and endurance events, but then also I imagine maybe it's intertwined with like sports dietetics too as a career.
Yeah. Well, I was in cross country in high school. I grew up very much not considering myself an athlete at all. I thought it was like the opposite of one. I was more into music. I was a classical musician for a very long time, and kind of the arts and humanities and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I was 15 and had a kind of tough breakup, and my friend convinced me to run around a track. So that was kind of what got me into it. And you know, I kind of fell in and out of running from there on through college, all that, but it was active. And it wasn't until my gosh, mid late 20s. I was living in London at the time and
Hmm.
coming off the back of another breakup. So there's a
Oh
theme there
no.
that I decided, oh, you know, I'm going to start running again. And kind of caught the bug and just kept doing longer and longer events and surprised myself at a half marathon. I was like, oh, wow, actually, I'm not like, I've never been like a fast runner, but I was like, oh, I'm a lot faster than I thought I was.
Mhm.
And entered my first marathon, Paris, which was fun, and made all of the mistakes, like every possible mistake you could make nutrition wise. And like I had a great coach, but nutrition was just a total disaster. So that first marathon was a GI nightmare. And so it was definitely through my own kind of like, I don't know what is going on. I don't know what to do. And I was kind of at a point in my life where I was kind of floating around not knowing what I want to do career-wise. So I'm a second career person. I didn't go back
Wow.
to school to become
Props.
a dietitian until I was 30.
Wow.
But kind of was through my own obsession with distance running and love of running, and getting back into that uh, I decided, oh wow, actually this is really interesting. I want to learn more about this. I want to help other people, so they don't make all the stupid mistakes I made. And that's kind of where that led me to go back to school and become a dietitian.
Oh, that's awesome. I always have so much respect, especially now, like as a mom, as like second career dietitians, because there were several in my group, in my internship and also just in my undergrad program. There was one, she's like bringing her like 6 month old to classes. Like, so much respect. That is so hard to do just because it's such a huge commitment financially and like time perspective wise. So just like bow down to you. That's
Well, I did not have, I will say I did not have kids at the time. So I had
still.
kids afterwards
Yeah.
because yeah, but I had there were some other people in my internship as well who I think there were a few that had kids and I was like, oh my God. I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine doing that. But
So hard.
then again, I don't know. My mom had my sister when she was in medical school, so I guess you know, you just make
Mhm.
it work. But no, it was crazy. We just like I remember there were a lot of other students who were, you know, 21 or, you know, just
Yeah.
like fresh off college. And here I was in my early 30s, just like busting my butt trying to get through this and basically getting a second a bachelor's degree, a second master's degree, except my master's in music. And it was just
Wow.
like exhausting. So yeah, it definitely was a little tricky. And it's why I'm almost 45 and at this point in my career, but it was worth it.
Oh yeah, you're doing great. I mean, yeah, I imagine there's not a lot of like superlatives or like prerequisites overlapping between music and
No,
dietetic
no,
majors. Like
it's
those are
the
both
best.
so hard in like di completely different ways. Um,
Yep,
that's really cool. Yeah, I just have a lot of respect for that. I was one of like the 21-year-olds. I literally like graduated and then started my internship a month later. So
yep.
I was freshy fresh. I can't imagine like going and working and actually making money of some sort and then being like, I'm gonna go back to school and like stop that and pay to work instead.
Yep. Yeah, that
Rough.
was I had a full 7 years in kind of the corporate legal world. And
Yes.
then I did a bunch of traveling. Then I kind of, it's just, yeah, I was like a hot mess in my 20s and I didn't know what I wanted to do because I stopped music, like lost that identity, tried, basically glommed onto running as another identity, which is a whole other problem.
Yeah.
And eventually kind of made my way. So, yeah, but 20s are meant for kind of, I don't know, just wandering around and figuring your, what out. So I don't know if I can say
Yeah,
that.
we
But
got
yeah.
experience in lots of different ways. And I
Yes.
very much relate to making every single possible mistake you can make at your first marathon. So I love that. Because yeah, it's like we've been there. When we're giving
Yep.
this advice, it's because we've been there.
Yes.
Well, today we're going to talk about even kind of like a step up, like ultra fueling, which I'm super excited about. I was like, I haven't talked about this much on the pod. I definitely need like an episode dedicated to this as like a kind of even just like an icebreaker because there's even so many different facets of ultra that we could talk about. I know we're going to talk mainly about running, but we can maybe define just like ultra events in general because this kind of base that we'll talk about is going to apply to most other types of events.
Yeah. So when we're talking ultra, um, I mean, I guess in the running sense, when we say ultra marathon, it's anything longer than a marathon, right? In ultra, generally speaking, I don't know if there's really like a true definition because, as we were talking about offline, like someone like if we're looking at time, like there are some marathoners that take
Mm-hmm.
6+ hours to do something. So whenever I think of an ultra endurance event, it's yes, distance, but it's also kind of like how much time are you out there,
Yeah.
So we're kind of it's just something that is like really long.
Yeah.
An endurance event we're often defining as, or at least I often define it as anything more than say like an hour where you're really out there for quite a long time. Your intensity is shifted a little bit versus say like a 5K event or something, so but so maybe we're looking at that half marathon, but then with ultra endurance, that's where yes, we are looking at, maybe it's that 50K and beyond. We're looking at maybe it's that 70.3 and beyond. um for triathlon. It could be a cycling event. It could be maybe you're doing your own kind of self-supported situation. There are lots of different things that kind of fall under that ultra category. It could be a really, really long swim.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I wouldn't say there's like one single definition, but just think something that is very, very long. Obviously, that requires a lot of fueling.
Yeah, like the physiology of like the fueling kind of principles. We'll talk about like it could apply to someone running a 6 hour marathon or longer. It could apply to someone doing an Ironman triathlon. It could apply to I had someone do a 50K swim like around
Yep.
Manhattan. Like it could apply to all of these kind of instances. Of course, there's going to be little logistical things that are going to be quirky depending on what you're doing, which we can address some of that too. But yeah, no, I appreciate that because once you cross into ultra, it's like the limit really doesn't exist. We've got like hundreds of mile races, multiple day long races. I would even consider like the 7 marathons on 7 continents in
Yep.
7 days is like an ultra distance event, even if it is not, totally continuous the whole time. So yeah, that there's a lot of options for us who are just like, I gotta take it to the next level.
And even like ultra marathon, that umbrella is huge. I mean,
Huge.
there are
Hmm.
sports within that sport. So it's like,
Yes.
what are we like talking about here? Because a 50K is extremely different than 200 milers, right? So, or a
Mhm.
stage race or whatever, they're just like so many things that we can talk about there, but there are general themes that I'm sure we're going to cover today. And then as you said, like with each kind of subcategory of things, there are different logistics and things we want to keep in mind.
Yeah, my last client, she was like, I'm running a 50K, but then in the fall, I'm running like some distance for 30 hours. That's how long I have to run. And it's just like
Yeah.
a choose your own adventure kind of
Yep.
situation. So, yeah, it really covers the spectrum there. I guess to kind of start with like running distances, ultras in general, like how does the fueling, I've talked a lot on this podcast about like fueling marathons, carb loading, breakfast before race day. I just did an episode on like the Boston Marathon or like a late start race. But for ultras, like obviously there'll be some little nuances, but how does the fueling like before the event even starts differ or stay the same from like a half or a full marathon?
It's more similar than I think most people think it would be. So, the general principle of we're mostly focusing on very easy to digest carbohydrate, right?
Yeah.
So lower fiber carbohydrate that you've practiced in training, of course, that you can tolerate. That's kind of like the main star of the main feature of your meal. And if we're using guidelines, the guideline we always use is like 1 to 4 gram per kilogram of carbs per 1 to 4 hours before. So, or we can throw out like a general recommendation, like somewhere in the 60 to 90 grams or more. Maybe you're doing that like 2 or 3 hours before your event, depending on, lots of things. But, timing's a really important thing too, because like, when we look at ultra marathons, often those events start really, really early. And of course, it depends
Yeah.
like time of year, where in the world. Like there are lots of things, sometimes things are starting in the middle of the night. Like, I mean, there
Yeah.
are all kinds of like
Barkley's
depend.
like whenever we
Yeah.
feel like it.
Yeah, whenever we feel like it, we'll wake you up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're like, there's no universal thing, whereas like a half marathon or a marathon, those are typically morning events. But as you just mentioned with Boston, which is coming on Monday, that's for some people, like a lot of my clients who are doing that race, they're not starting till 11 or 11:30. And
Hmm.
so but they're waking up at like 5:30 or something. So we have to talk about the multiple breakfasts and this and that. I'd say
Yeah.
the main thing that sets it apart and again, I'm thinking more in terms of, well, actually it could be for triathlon too, but I'm thinking of running especially, is that you might want to include a little more, like a little protein and or fat as tolerated, because you are starting out at likely a slower pace
Yeah.
intensity versus say like a half or a half marathon or a marathon. So we have that kind of aspect going. You're likely to get a little hungry. I definitely have my Ironman folks. I have a client I'm thinking of right now who gets really hungry. So we added in something with more protein in the lead up to her swim, because we want to make sure she wasn't hungry. So that's something we think about. But you also, again, like if we're like the broader ultra umbrella, like depending on which sport you're doing, that will also determine like how much you can tolerate. If you're just cycling, um,
Right.
not to downplay cycling, but like, it's cycling versus running, like there's less
Yeah.
jostling, so you might be able to tolerate more. And honestly, even like when I think about my marathoners and half marathoners, we're often also including like I think like about peanut butter, for instance. That's such a good
Right.
example. Like peanut butter has a little bit of protein, some fat. Like but often my marathoners are also doing that if they have enough time to digest and they tolerate that, because especially when we're talking about a later start marathon, those people are getting hungry too, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, this really is always an individualized thing. And but sometimes my ultra folks are including a little bit more, yeah, protein, but or fat, but that's really the main difference.
Yeah, and it's like that kind of carbohydrate per kilogram I guess recommendation reference range. Like it's not different necessarily
No.
for ultras. Like if you can tolerate on the higher end, great, but it's not necessarily like there's a different reference range.
Yeah.
Um and then carb loading, same kind of deal too for carb loading days before.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not doing anything different for carb loading. I mean, we always again have to individualize this, and I don't know about you. I have a bunch of people running Boston this weekend, so I've just been
Yeah.
doing so many plans for people and talking about carb loading nonstop. And a lot of my runners, like when they came to me, they were really under consuming carbohydrate, and we're not yet even at a point where we can do 8 grams per kilogram per day. Like
Yeah.
that would be such a huge jump. Like we're still like maybe we can do 6 or
Yeah.
maybe 7. So often when I'm doing and just for context in case anyone's not familiar with carb loading, um usually like what is it? It's 10, so like I think the traditional guideline is 10 to 12 grams per kilogram, so carb per kilogram of body weight.
Mhm.
Is it 48 to 36 hours? Is that what it is? No, 36 to 48 hours, something like that. Around like, yeah, 2-ish days. And so,
Mhm.
but usually what's a little bit more better tolerated, or what I often recommend, is 8 grams per kilogram per day for 3 days
For 3 days. Yeah,
for
same.
people. That's usually what I do. But sometimes what I'll do is I'll calculate that total amount and divide it across 4 days. And so then we'll just lower it a little bit and have them do 4 days. So I have a bunch of clients, who are doing that instead. So all to say, like carb loading, it comes down to like you're practicing this in training, and then you're going based on like, hey, like, are you eating enough carbohydrate on an everyday basis? Like, so when we think about ultra runners compared to um like a marathon runner or something like that, like you are putting in so much more training volume, like even
Yeah.
more than these other athletes. And so your daily requirements for carbohydrate is skyrocketing based on that volume. So it will be very much tailored to what you're doing. Again, this is such a broad category that we're talking about here. But if you're not even getting in 5 grams per kilogram per day, we know you're under fueling for carbs. Like we just know that.
Yeah.
So so then the reason why I'm talking about this is then carb loading comes along. It's like we can't expect you to like suddenly
Like
tolerate this
double it.
huge amount of carbohydrate. You'll feel terrible. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it's all the same. We just have to kind of keep in mind where you're at.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to bring up is like this obviously starts weeks before your race date. Like practicing this in training is super duper important so that you can maximize like what you're actually getting out of it. Because if you are habitually consuming 3 or 4 grams per kilogram, of body weight of carbohydrates, like, you're a 150 pound person, you're consuming like 200, 250 grams of carbohydrates. That's not enough for most training volumes. I would argue even for marathon training, some even like higher volume, half and lower. So like just making that jump overnight is probably not going to go super well for some people. So
Yeah.
trying to get you up to speed is helpful. And for the ultra world too, just from a training perspective as a coach and a personal trainer as well. And I've never run an ultra. Have I not? No, I haven't run an ultra event besides just not running tangents while at marathons. But I haven't run an ultra event.
Yeah.
I've run trail races and done like a lot of self-paced like hikes and stuff that are hours and hours long, but like the training is just a little different. Like you're doing back-to-back long runs, you're doing like there's less recovery time, which is part of like what makes the training successful. You're not necessarily doing for a 50K or something like a longer long run than you would for a marathon, but you're doing more of them during the week. And that's where too, I think getting this practice and training is like super important so that you can just copy and paste come race week.
Yeah.
So I love that you covered that. Kind of going into like the during part of a ultra long run to like kind of in training for the ultra events. Yeah, kind of similar principles. I talk about marathons, half marathons all the time on here, like 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, maybe even more than that for some people is kind of like our general baseline. We talk about sodium, we talk about fluids, like what changes and what's the same for these longer events.
Yeah, so that doesn't change in an ultra. So we're still going into that like 60 to 90 grams plus range for carbohydrate per hour. And we've been seeing actually in the ultra space a lot of more in the elite space, a lot of people pushing that and going quite
Yeah.
high, going well
Yeah.
over 100 grams per hour, which is really interesting. And I'd say the majority of people don't really need that or will tolerate that because ultra endurance events, it's like the longer you're out there, the more
Can
the
go
higher
wrong.
the risk of G yeah, the more they can go wrong, the higher risk of GI issues often with ultra. And I know we're talking about this in a bit. We're encountering kind of extreme conditions. And again, I'm thinking not just ultra runs but ultra marathons, but like triathlons, so long course
Yeah.
triathlon is just like the heat or whatever else is going on. So there's a lot happening. And so yeah, I tend to kind of encourage people to stay in that 60 to 90 gram an hour range unless people are just crushing it
Or
and they are,
ballers. Yeah.
yeah, they're just doing so great and they nailed everything else and they're tolerating it well and they don't come. I mean, it's so rare because usually when I get an ultra person, it's very common for me to get someone who cannot figure out why they're having so many GI issues. Like I vomit every race, or I
Yeah.
whatever, I DNF this. So like often people are coming to me with issues. Once in a while I get someone who wants to just like optimize, but that's just not very common. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so that's usually where we're at. Again, I most people, or not most people, a lot of people are coming to me and they're not even at that 60 gram
Yeah.
mark. So we're really like working towards getting them at a bare minimum of 60 grams an hour. And then yeah, sodium, fluids, that's all going to be the same. Fluids, we're still trying to figure out, okay, what is your sweat rate? Now I will say in these longer events, we need to be replacing a higher percentage of your sweat losses because, over time those losses are compounding and it's much easier to become really dehydrated and to be losing more than 2 or 3% of your body weight, which is usually kind of where we're like wanting
Totally.
to minimize that, and where we can see kind of negative impacts on performance. So, we're still kind of testing a sweat rate, which you can do very easily at like a home scale with a home scale, like on a training run or something. So we're working on that. We're kind of figuring out, okay, well, where's your sodium coming from? And really the main difference then is like sources. So I will say that when I think about my road runners, sometimes they're using a sports drink, what's on course, or they're, carrying something. My ultra runners are, especially with my trail folks, are almost like they're carrying hydration packs. They're carrying the things that they're going to take. Yes, sometimes, they're using stuff at aid stations, of course, but, they're practicing with whatever sports drink or other sodium, whatever products, things that they want to carry. So it's kind of like, well, where are these carbs coming from? Because in a road race, it's gels almost always,
Yeah.
and some sports drink, or sometimes we see chews or waffles or whatever, but for the most part, it's like very clear sport products. And then when we go into like trail running, especially, or any other. Because again, when we say even ultra marathon, it's like, is it trail? Is it road? Is
Right.
it high altitude like mountain running? Is it not? Again, there's
Yeah.
so many
Are
things
there
that we can
any
talk
aid
about.
stations?
Yeah, are there any aid stations?
Yeah.
Can you get water from a stream? Like what's
Yeah.
happening? Um,
Yeah.
and even like comparing to triathlon, which I know you'll talk about in a different episode, I'm sure. Often my triathletes, like, yeah, they might nibble on some solid food here and there, but it's often a higher intensity and people are still sticking mostly with sport products.
Yeah.
Trail running is just like a different thing. There's a lot of hiking involved, or at least when I'm running, doing
Yeah.
my ultras. So I've
Same.
I've done I've done many 50Ks. So I've mostly done 50Ks. I did one 50 miler, the JFK 50 ages ago.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, I certainly am not running up the mountains when they're there. But yeah, so so a lot of these principles are staying the same, but then the logistics of, well, how are you carrying it? Okay, a lot of people usually have a hydration vest of some kind. And where are they coming from? And so you might be using gels or chews. Like chews are definitely a little bit easier to handle because, again, you're at a slightly lower intensity. You're working in, sports drink for sure, because it's like when you're trying to hit 60 to 90 grams an hour, it's so much easier if you have that base amount of, I don't know, maybe you're getting in like 20 to 30, 40, whatever, how many grams of carbohydrate per hour from your fluids. So that really helps. But then
Yeah.
we're bringing in, because it's such a long period of time. So, anywhere from, I guess the fast runners are going to be really fast. So maybe it's not too long, but let's say your average person, like for me doing a 50K, I think the fastest one I did was like 6 hours and something. So,
Mhm.
you're out there a while. And then people are out there for like 30 something hours, right? If we're looking at a slower 100 miler. So over that time, you're missing so many meals and snacks, and you cannot just do gels and sports drinks. Like you will, I mean, yes, okay, I say cannot. I have definitely encountered people who have and do, so there will always
Yeah.
be outliers. And then, of course, if you're an elite runner, they're mostly doing that stuff. But your average kind of ultra runner you need to mix it up. So you're not just like, getting flavor fatigue and texture fatigue. So having a
Yeah.
different, like, having like sweet and savory or salty, crunchy, fresh tasting things, like just getting all of this variety of what you're taking in, is really important. And again, like maybe you're hungry, maybe not. Again, this differs for everybody, but you're missing a lot of meals. So we do want to start including protein. I don't know if it's like the ISSN paper, I forget where the guideline comes from, where it's like 5 to 10 grams of protein per hour,
Hmm.
once you're kind of out there for a long time.
I think it is that
Yeah,
paper.
I
And
think it
it's
is that
like,
paper.
well, yeah, once you're it's like plus 6 hours. That's when I
Yeah,
think it becomes more beneficial than like
yeah,
potentially problematic with GI stuff.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm encouraging people to, maybe they're having like little nibbles of like maybe there's a bar that has, maybe you're doing half a bar and like the full bar has like, I don't know, 10 or 12 grams of protein in it or something like that. Or sometimes we're even doing like a recovery drink. So I have some people who swap out every once in a while, like, doing one of the, whether it's like Scratch or Tailwind or whatever, one of those recovery drinks and sipping on that. I have an Ironman athlete who really likes to do that. or doing like a quesadilla, or they're having like chicken noodle soup, or I mean there's so many things. Like then they're just like kind of the straight carby foods, like boiled potatoes with salt. That was always a favorite of mine. Things
Yeah.
like chips and pretzels, like a lot of these foods sometimes are not necessarily getting you like a ton of carbohydrate. Like if you're munching on a pretzel, it's very dry, but it mixes it up and it's just like a palate cleanser. So
Yeah.
or something sour, like maybe you're sucking on like a sour candy or eating candy or whatever. So there are a lot of different things that are you'd find at aid stations that, maybe you're not carrying them on you. And then there are things that you will kind of carry on you. So yeah, it's a much broader category and like the options are kind of endless. So I'm sure I'm leaving things out, but that's kind of just an introduction to kind of fueling during these events.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you look at an aid station at like Boston and it's like there's water, there's Gatorade, like maybe
Yes,
there's more in gel. You look at an aid station at a 50K trail race and it's like
a
a
potluck.
buffet. Like
Yes.
there's someone cooking bacon sandwiches, like there's, your typical like candy and like maybe Coca-Cola, like those types
Yeah.
of things. Um, yeah, I see that a lot too. I think a lot of marathoners run into like flavor fatigue and just being like over taking gels. And when you think about your experience marathoning and having that happen, it's like, okay, but now imagine you're out here for 4 more hours. It's like we can't really afford to just give into that. So I also see, yeah, like inserting kind of like those real foods, so to speak, or just different flavor profiles, or strategically putting in the flavorless stuff, like for when you're really done. Like those types of things can be
Hmm.
helpful. But then we run into the problem of you can get, 25 grams of carbohydrate in something this big, or you can have like a whole potato. And it's like, well, we're not going to have a whole potato every 30 minutes. So
Yeah, no, no,
um,
no.
it's good to
Yeah,
kind of like mix
yeah,
it up. And so you can keep that base of 60 grams of carb per hour minimum.
yeah. Yeah, I will say, like, when I used to spectate New York City Marathon every year when I used to live there, I
Yes.
loved handing out. I would sit there and I would have a big box of tissues, because this would be at like mile 22 or mile 20 or something. Yeah, I'd have a huge box of tissues and I would hand out pretzels, and everyone was like, "Thank you," and
Yes.
they were so happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and like New York City's a great example too. Like some of the marathon majors, especially like, we've got people from all walks of life running these races. And I say New York City in particular because it irks me a little bit that they do it this way, but I kind of get why. It's like we've got usually charity runners are in the last wave. Not always. Sometimes these are like the slower back of the pack runners. Maybe it's even their first marathon. They've never done this before. And then also it's like the day after daylight savings time. So it's darker earlier and like we're
Mhm.
running out of stuff at the aid stations. It's just like,
Yeah.
why are we doing it that way? Like these people are having a completely different race experience than, wave one. But even for someone who is in a marathon, like in a road race, that you're saying that like taking in, maybe some protein, some more complex fuel sources on top of the carbohydrate base from the gels and stuff could be really useful, even if it's not like a 50K
It depends on the person, because like we always have to remember when we talk about pace, like what intensity
intensity.
is that for you? So you can
Yeah.
have someone who is running a 12-minute per mile pace or whatever, and they're working really, really hard. You know what I mean? So like we have to kind of keep that in mind. And so I'm always encouraging people, like when we're talking about, do I really need that many carbs? And we were just talking about my 80-year-old marathon runner who's like run walking, and she's probably gonna take 6-ish hours, and we were talking about a plan, and I'm having her work on her carb intake, but she was saying, I get really hungry towards the end, and so we're like, oh well, she wanted to include like a honey stinger waffle, and that doesn't really have. I mean, it has a little fat, it has fat in it, so that can help with the hunger piece. Doesn't really have much protein, but it does have, I think, what don't they have like 8 grams of fat or something like that? They have it has
I think it's something like that. I have a
something
bunch
like that.
there. I could
Yeah.
look.
I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
it's like 7 or 8 or 9 grams. So, and so I was like, great. So,
Yeah,
take
that's
a
right.
couple of those and you can kind of snack on that, and we'll throw that in, right? So yeah, this is where you have to keep in mind like what like just your own individual experience, and what's going on there. Because at the other end of the extreme, like someone can run a 50K in like
Right.
4 something hours or whatever, and maybe it's even, is it a flat, like super flat road? ultra marathon? Is it like a super mountainous, crazy kind of race? So they're just like there's so much variation. So we always have to individualize all this to you and the exact event that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, even like I said, I haven't run a ultra event, but like even if I'm doing like a trail 10 mile like run, that's just like me and myself and I'm
Yeah.
like I need like a snack. Like I'm like I want something a bit more than my gels. Like my gels are great, but like there is
Yeah.
a point sometimes where if you get a little bit of that lower intensity slow down, whether it's because you're going downhill or you're having to walk going uphill and you're not like, pushing it to the absolute red zone, like you're probably
Yeah.
going to feel those hunger cues a little bit more that we're just not getting during like those really high intensity efforts. So I love that. I think the terrain totally matters because it's hard to like red line the whole way when you're going like up and down and over rocks because like you kind of have to focus on different things and technique when you're doing that.
Yeah.
There are talented people out there, of course, but
Yeah.
not me. Um, I think the other kind of factor of this is like when I know when we're talking about like the road versus trail community too, it's just like the road runners want to be like aerodynamic and they want to have like small fuel and they don't even want to carry the fuel, but we're like negotiating with them so that they carry the fuel. And then with trail, it's almost like a total mindset switch where it's like we got a backpack, we got snacks, we got a buffet of stuff, and we're a little bit, more okay with being less aerodynamic sometimes. And I think in the road community too, a lot of the times we're really hyper fixated on like having the best conditions and like we want to wake up early so that it's not too hot. But trail, like you're more likely, I find, to encounter some extreme like temperature changes conditions, especially if you're on the trails in an ultra setting. Just because you're out there for such a long time. What
Yeah.
do we want to consider when that's the case, especially like when there's a lot of heat involved, from a hydration standpoint, especially?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we're out for a really long time, and again, this will depend on your event, but yeah, heat definitely can be a factor. If you're in the mountains, obviously, like,
It's
like
both.
if you're starting really early, it can be freezing and then it can get really hot. You can have just rapidly changing conditions. So it will depend kind of on the terrain, but let's say like it's heat. So obviously kind of making sure that you're really well hydrated and fueled going into your event. I mean, that's important for everyone for everything, but it becomes even more important when you're out there for a really long time. You don't really have as much buffer. You really want to be well prepared going in. And it also means that you want to fuel consistently and adequately from the get-go. You don't want to be like, "Oh, I'm, kind of still full. I'm going to hold off on, I'm not going to take anything until 45 minutes in." No, no, no. You really like, we want to be getting something in. For my ultra folks, we're usually like eating every 15 to 30 minutes or something, depending. Again, it really depends on what people are nibbling on and how they like to eat things. If you're at altitude, that's like a whole other beast, right? And so you might
Yep.
find that smaller sips and bites sit better for you versus at sea level, where maybe you can have an entire gel or an entire whatever. And of course, just depending on someone's individual tolerance. But yeah, when we're dealing with heat, obviously your sweat rate is going to go up, and this is for anything. Like, so this also applies for marathons, but the difference being in the ultra setting, you are out there for so much longer. You are going to be exposed to greater heat potentially for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
Um, and your appetite can really tank, and your risk of GI trouble goes up, because just generally when we're exercising, your blood is kind of being shunted away from your gut, but this becomes even worse when it's hot out, your body's trying to cool itself and you're much more likely to get that kind of like sloshy, kind of not so great feeling in your stomach. And so often what I'm doing with people is just having them, if they start to feel not so great, I mean, again, like prevention is so key. So whatever you can do to really stay on top of your hydration, if it's going to be hot, can we do some, heat training in advance so you're not totally like going from training in the winter to suddenly you're running in an 80-degree situation or whatever. So preparation is key here. But if you kind of get in this situation where it's like, okay, now I'm really struggling, it's really hot, I don't feel good, it's like, okay, well, can you kind of slow your pace? Can we cool you off with ice, with whatever? There are lots of different cooling strategies. Um, making sure like if your stomach starts to turn, like we don't want to like stop everything, but can you like just slow things down at least? Obviously, if you're like actively puking, like there's only so much you can do. But hey, the whole boot and rally, sometimes that kind of turns things around.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's like it's also kind of paying attention, like if you do have issues, it's like, okay, well, often upper GI issues that might point to kind of a hydration problem. If it's lower GI, that might be something different. So it's also kind of troubleshooting what's going on. Um, but yeah, I'd say when it comes to heat, it's like whatever you can do to prepare, if because chances are you're gonna kind of know in advance. So whatever you can do to prepare and with all your gear and your plan and whatever, and then kind of just trying to troubleshoot. Because when it comes to ultra stuff, you really have to have like you want to have a plan in place. It has to be a flexible plan. You want to have lots of different options available if like suddenly, oh my God, I cannot take this thing anymore. I need something else. And often, like with a marathon plan, again, I just did a bunch of these. Like we're doing the pretty much like sometimes there's a little variation, but it's usually like the same thing throughout. Like, okay, this is what you're doing every hour. This is it, these two gels, blah blah blah. With ultra, like we're gonna change things up because are you running at night? Maybe like your nighttime stuff. Is it like you're approaching an aid station, you want to eat now, so you're gonna not take the gel. Maybe you're taking the gel at a different time. Maybe at night you're kind of going for more caffeine or more liquid nutrition because that's easier. So we it's hard because and whenever I'm making fueling plans for ultra, it can be really tricky because you don't want to make it overly complicated, but at the same
Yeah.
time you have to account for all these different moving parts and things that are going on, and you want to have options. So it can get really tricky, and you need to practice lots of different things. And the more things that you can do, the better, because then you have options, and options are really important.
I totally echo that. The options are just the ability to be flexible is so
Yep.
important, especially in ultra. Something you had said too was like the complexity of a fuel plan. I was just talking about this with my last client. Like it's easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy. It's hard enough for people to remember I have to alternate this gel with this gel every 30 minutes and I have to sip my water during a marathon. But for an ultra, it's like, when do I take the pretzels? When do I take the chews? When am I supposed to take this? Like, it can be kind of hard to keep track of all of that. Like, do you have any just tips for people on like how to navigate that and how to like
Yeah.
practice in training? But I know sometimes it's not like a total copy and paste on race day.
Totally. Yeah. So this is where sports drink is really helpful. So I'm almost all of my ultra folks are usually doing some sort of fluid that has carbs and electrolytes in it. So electrolytes mostly we're talking about sodium.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of just think about like your base layer there of base or I don't know, base amount. It's kind of
Yeah,
setting the foundation for your fueling. And same goes by the way for long course triathlon. Like it's really
totally.
hard, especially on the bike. Like it's really hard to do. Like I don't know any triathlete who's not having like a carb containing fluid with salts on their bike. Like that's just seems stupid to me.
Mhm.
So it's just make sure that it gives you again, whether that's 20 grams, 30 grams, like whatever the amount is, it's giving you this minimum amount of carbohydrate. It's getting your fluids, getting your salts, you're multitasking feeling wise. So that's really important. So we kind of like determine, okay, how much fluid do we need to get? How much salt do we need to get? Like what's going on? You pick your product, you practice. And so then we lock that in.
Mhm.
Now, I will say that sometimes we want to change that up if they're sick of that flavor or they want plain water or whatever. So we kind of have some options in place where it's like, okay, you're getting your carb and your salt from somewhere else. We can just stick with plain water and pair it with that. So we have a plan in place to make that flexible. So that's kind of number one. And then we're saying, okay, let's say you're getting 20 grams an hour from your sport drink. Then I want to hit 60. Okay, so I need 40 grams from somewhere. It can come
Yeah.
from wherever, but I need to get it somewhere. Where is it going to come from? And then you just kind of think about, cool, I have a 40-gram gel. Okay, so it could come from that. I have this pack of chews. I can nibble on that very slowly over the hour. I have, this food that the half bar plus half the chews. So it's kind of like this little game of like Tetris or however you
Math.
want to think about it. Yeah, or math, but it's kind of just knowing very loosely, okay, these are the groupings of fuel that I have and that I like. I know that, okay, like I could do a half of a fig bar. Like I personally love using those little Nature Bakery bar
Yeah,
things,
I
like
love
two in a
those.
thing. So like each one's 20 grams. So it's like cool. I know that I can do one of those plus my 20 grams from my scratch plus a serving of chews, and I'm pretty much there. And maybe I'm adding on just for, to mix things up. I'm cramming a couple chips or pretzels in my mouth. Again, it's not really going to give you the carb piece or really like that much meaningful salt. It's just like I just need a flavor change. Like whenever I personally, and again, it's different for everyone, but personally, I literally will just grab one or two chips. Like I just need something to crunch. I don't want to eat that many. Um, but again, everyone's different there. Maybe you're having like a whole package of goldfish. I mean, whatever. There's
I
so
like
many
the
different options.
goldfish. Yeah.
Yeah, goldfish, like a client just asked about sweet potato chips and other things. They can do rice balls. Again, quesadillas. Maybe you're doing a PB&J. Like there are lots of different things you can do.
Mm,
So I think it's just kind of understanding that, okay, if and this is where I personally, I used to use a bladder a lot, but I switched from using a bladder to using soft flasks because visually I need to know where I'm at and then
mhm.
I can be really precise with like, cool, I need to get, each one is 16 ounces. I need to finish this bottle in this amount of time. I can have a little extra water with it. Maybe my bladder has just plain water or something else. But this will also depend on, well, how much time do you have between aid stations? Because there are races where like, because what I sometimes do is I'll put like powder bottles or filled up bottles where the bladder goes, and so I can just literally keep swapping out the bottles. Like you can carry like six of those things or whatever, depending on your pack.
Oh,
But
nice.
sometimes that's not enough water, depending on your sweat rate, depending on, what's going on. And what if like you have a really long distance between aid stations and some of these like
Mhm.
200-mile races or other kinds of events, you go a really long time. So this is where we have to really think about what you're doing, what your individual needs are. Um, like do you really like sometimes I'm like, we don't have the luxury of using soft flasks. We have to use your 3-liter bladder plus soft flasks, and we're just gonna have to fill the bladder with your sport drink, and that's what we're gonna do. So again, lots of different situations here. So you have to think about what your individual needs are, what your event is like, and what you have to do about it. So yeah.
The bladder like blindness thing is such an issue too,
Yeah.
because like then you're kind of like, okay, well, I could do like a bad gulp as an ounce, and I have to two gulps per 10 minutes, or like
Yeah.
kind of break it down that way. But I agree, like the less math people have to do, especially once they're hours into this thing, like the better. So just having a base understanding of like this is my template, and this is like some options I have to fill in my template is super helpful. Something else you had brought up too, well, two things. One I wanted to cover was kind of just like the carbohydrate gram per hour. Since we are seeing like a lot of people wanting to get higher and higher and higher, we're also going to talk about the other end of the spectrum in a second.
Mhm.
Um, where people want to be fat adapted. But for the high
Yep.
carb folks, we have a lot of like high carb mixes and drinks coming out. I'm
Hmm.
just curious, like with the TON, the scratch, those types of products, like what's your experience with those? And like how do you kind of help people incorporate those if that's something they even want to incorporate? I have my opinion, so I'm just curious. I'm curious to hear yours.
It's funny. I literally have all of the high carb products in my cabinets right now, and I have not tried any of them.
Yeah.
I've been on a little bit of a hiatus from like super long stuff, and so I mean, I guess I could totally like mix it up and just try it. But I don't know about
Yeah.
you, but when I just like try it when I'm just like sitting around doing it, tastes really different than when I'm out on a
Yes.
trail running.
I totally agree.
But I should still just mix it up. My husband's been using all of it. He likes all of it. But yeah, so I can't speak to how it like tastes and all that stuff. But I do have all those products laying around. And I have clients who use it and love it, and I have clients who really don't like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, it really depends. There are situations where higher carb products are really helpful. So, for instance, we're coming out of winter, and in really cold, freezing temps, it can be helpful to have more concentrated carb solutions. And especially if it's harder to kind of unwrap things and use your hands and do stuff, like maybe these really, and of course, like these higher carb products won't be freezing, as easily. So that's a situation where it's really helpful. Overnight, maybe you're doing a more concentrated product because it's just really freaking hard to eat and you don't want to eat, but you can drink and you need your fluid. So it's kind of like, okay, cool, let's just do this. So that's another situation where it can be helpful. And I know people who are taking it like just regularly, like in the daytime, but I mean, I guess we can, it's kind of like speaking to the whole like, is something like hypertonic, hypotonic, isotonic, and kind of maybe that's kind of what you're getting at, like kind of the risk of GI issues. Are people tolerating this? Um, yeah, so I don't
I
know.
find
I
it
mean,
super hit or miss, like with the
it's really
full
hit or miss.
dose. Like if like I've had people do just like half a dose or like less, that's a
Hmm.
little bit less risky. But
But
like
then
what
what's the point of that?
right, I know. Like
Like,
what I
use the
find
regular.
from a sports drink perspective is like they do tend to be on the lower end of sodium compared to like
Yes,
their
yeah,
regular sports drink equivalent.
yeah,
So that can be a factor where they're like, I'm getting the bottle of the high carb that I diluted a little bit. And it's like, well, now it's super diluted from a sodium standpoint, even though you're getting the carbs, and maybe that's where the GI issues are coming from. But yeah, people get GI issues sometimes if they're only using like that carb source like over the course of a long event. So I was just
yeah,
curious. I've
yeah.
tried both Tailwind and Scratch. From a flavor perspective, they're definitely different than the sports drink. Like they're milder, they are less sweet, like they're a bit starchier tasting.
Oh, interesting.
Um, so I think for some people that can be like a really good thing, like a good mix up. But for others,
Mm,
it's like, oh wait, this doesn't taste like my typical sports drink. I don't like it. So it kind of depends on the person.
yeah.
But I was just curious about that. I'm curious too, like you had mentioned like altitude potentially being a
Mm,
factor with some of these races. I've done like a couple Ragnar races, like hikes, like higher altitude runs very sparingly. I live very much at sea level, so these are vacation type events, but
yeah, yeah.
that's a bit of a different beast. Can you talk a little bit about maybe special considerations for that? Especially like if people can't necessarily go and just like acclimate to it.
Yeah, it's hard. I am a sea level creature, like through
Same.
and through. I see everybody. I see our colleagues who live in Colorado and all our, and everyone doing all these like crazy things at crazy altitudes. And I just think back to, the few events I've done where I literally like I could barely walk. I just remember I did like the Steamboat Springs half marathon. I was training for Chicago Marathon at the time, and I did that just we were on vacation, and it was gorgeous. It was so fun, and I was just getting my ass kicked because
Yeah.
like. I literally was walking downhill and I was like dying and I'm like, what is happening? Like we're
Yeah, it's
walking downhill.
wild. I
It's
did
wild.
a I did a
Uh,
Ragnar leg and they gave it to me because I'm like a lizard swamp creature who can handle a lot of heat. They gave me like the longest leg in like the heat of the day in like
yeah,
Zion National Park in Utah in the desert. And I had a camelback bladder and I think I went through 4 liters of fluid for like an 8 mile like run that didn't even take me 90 minutes. Like it was like a stupid amount of fluid and I was
yeah,
still just like so thirsty at the end. So I know hydration's a factor, but yeah, talk to
yeah,
us about that.
yeah. I was gonna say so like yeah, so yeah, hydration, our needs definitely go up. And there are some physiological reasons uh that explain that. I want to say carb needs kind of increase a little bit as well. And but the problem is like so we have these needs that are kind of increasing, but your tolerance for it can be reduced
Horror.
because a lot of people are dealing with the effects of altitude, especially if you're not kind of accustomed, acclimatized, and you can start to feel kind of sick, dizzy, nauseous, all that stuff. And so it can be hard for people. And this is like what I was saying before. It's like if you can just kind of slow things down. So, if you're normally at sea level, like I trained some or not trained, I coached some people who were doing um like Hard Rock and some of these like Leadville, like some of these kind of higher
Mhm.
altitude races. And we were talking about, okay, well, at sea level you can take in 80 grams an hour, no probs. Let's bring that down to 60. How does that, let's see if we can tolerate that because, so that's something we're playing with. Like, so while maybe they came out a little bit earlier and they were kind of testing that out, and if you can go up, great, but maybe we're being a little conservative with our targets. We're really pushing, like, so at sea level, can we really push the fluids a little bit and kind of go on the upper end of what you might, you know, need so that you can feel what it's like to get that volume in. And then practicing, like instead of taking like really large amounts all at once, like can we kind of take these smaller, more frequent sips and just kind of get into a habit of doing that? So yeah,
Mhm.
those are just some things we kind of practice. But yeah, it can definitely be tricky. And I do not handle altitude well at all. Like I will just never be. I really want to do some of the Tahoe races near me,
Mhm.
but I am terrified because they're so hard.
Yeah, I also find too, like if people maybe aren't as on top of or just like in tune with knowing like their iron status. Like I do
Yes.
find sometimes too, like if someone's like, I went on vacation in like Colorado and I had a really hard time, like sometimes I do find people notice that more if there is like an insufficiency or deficiency or even like
Mhm.
anemia issue, just because
Yep.
your body's trying to make even more blood volume and it already
Yep.
doesn't have enough. So
Yeah.
sometimes that can be like a factor as well. If like you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I love running these ultra races, but I live at sea level and I always go to altitude and like perish when I go. If you can't go acclimate, maybe just make sure you're getting those labs tested too to make sure that you're not like already depleted going in because that'll just make it feel so much worse.
Yeah, which is why
And
we have different recommendations for ferritin, for
right.
altitude, right? But it's also like the other thing I think about, like I was in Mammoth not that long ago, and I just remember, like I
Mm,
think we were sleeping at like 8,000 something. So it wasn't like crazy high, but it was well higher than I'm used
pretty
to.
high.
It's hard to sleep. Like you don't sleep well either. So it's like there's like a lot of things going on that can mess with you. So
Yeah.
um yeah, and of course like not sleeping well, that impacts kind of your ability to kind of fuel and feel good and all that. So there's a lot going on at altitude.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you're able to like look into any of that, if that's just like not where you live, that's definitely helpful. Yeah, we went and visited Leadville, and I was like, oh my God. My husband and I were like, we're just gonna go for a 3 mile run. And we were both like walking for like a mile. And we were like, that was plenty. That was good.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
frustrating though, because you're like, I want to go see like all of
I
this
know.
stuff, but I can't like get my body on board if I'm only here for a day or two.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, that's definitely important because that's a huge factor that we just don't get at a lot of marathons. To kind of flip to like the opposite end of the spectrum, there's a lot of this in the endurance community. I think it's even more concentrated in the ultra community, and is the idea of being like fat adapted, doing fasted training, kind of even keto, like kind of lifestyle of training. I mean, we hear elite athletes talking about trialing this, and we also hear influencers with absolutely no credentials kind of talking about this too. Like, do we really need to be focusing on that? I know the argument tends to be like it's a lower intensity activity, so we're using more fat for energy. But as a sports dietitian, can you speak to this at all? Because I know this is like very prevalent.
Yeah, and this has really been around for a long time. So this is not like anything new per se. I mean, I think it was really getting quite loud, even just like over 10 years ago. I
Yeah.
want to say that pretty, I mean, it's been loud for a while, but in
Yeah.
the endurance community. So yeah, this is nothing really new. I'd say the newer thing is more the super, super high carb, where
Super
we're
high
seeing with
carb.
David Roche
It's like
doing, like the
both ends.
crazy, crazy high carb, which isn't necessarily so great for a lot of people either.
Yeah.
But better than low carb. Yeah, so
Yes.
so the low carb, yeah, this is kind of this topic that everyone keeps revisiting over and over again. And we really have decades of research pointing to just how important and helpful carbohydrates are for a million things in everyday life, for health, for training, for performance, all that. And there really is no meaningful, substantial evidence to support that low carb is supportive of performance. And there was this kind of like paper that came out not long ago that was causing a little bit of a stir in the community. And I know I've addressed it a little bit on, should I talk about my podcast very briefly, with Megan Featherston, and
Oh,
I talked
nice.
about it on someone else's podcast, and lots of people talked about it, so I'm sure you can go look into it. But really, it's yeah, there hasn't been any kind of meaningful
The
research
paper was
behind that
not a new paper. It was a new
no.
paper talking about old papers.
Yeah, yeah, whole paper, exactly.
Yeah.
It was a narrative review. So yeah, so there isn't really anything substantial really pointing to that eating a low carb, which by the way, like what do we even define that as, right? There's no good definition of low carb.
Yeah.
Like you could say someone's being low carb and having like 300 grams a day because that's
Right.
lower than they should be, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, we're assuming someone's like really, really low carb, but yeah, so that's one thing. Um, and I will also say like there will always be people who like find something that works for them. And I actually recently had Zach Bitter on my podcast, and that was a really great conversation. I was on his podcast as well, which where we discussed that narrative review paper.
Oh, cool.
And he's such a great example of, a very successful elite athlete. He's an ultra runner who he did low carb for God, I want to say 14 years, a really long time, over 10 years. Very successful doing it. And less than a year ago, it was like last summer, decided to try high carb and just has been doing high carb now. And it's been really interesting. And he's been kind of documenting all the things. And so I was talking about, what kind of led to the switch and all this stuff. And it's all to say, like, there will always be people who anecdotally something works for them and they're talking about it. And science, of course, it takes a lot to kind of do these studies and have high quality studies, and we can't always study everything, but from what we know as of now, there's really no kind of substantial evidence. And for all the people, for the very few people, I will say, who find that this works for them in the ultra setting, there are a million people where it did not work. So I'm sure you've encountered lots of people who tried this and they felt horrible. And it led to kind of all kinds of problems. And so that's kind of like one thing. So we're really not seeing any evidence-based reason to go low carb, to do fasted workouts, all this stuff. We also see kind of the negative impacts of doing this, and whether it's kind of increased injury risk or preventing you from kind of doing these more like higher intensity pushes, or there are lots of different things that could potentially happen. But the other thing too is like when we're thinking about, okay, how can we become more like efficient at burning fat? You can just do your freaking training, so like go through your training block and
Mhm.
you'll become more efficient and in some senses kind of fat adapted, right? You don't have to necessarily like do these extreme diets. And it's in
Right.
so we can
Right.
like modulate the diet. We can kind of periodize carbohydrates. Like we can do all these things. It's not to say that you can never play around with your intake, but this kind of extreme way of doing things is not something that I ever recommend for athletes, especially endurance athletes.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I just think like we need to remember that it's not risk free. Like
Yeah.
like it's just
Yeah.
it's something where when we're talking about the math, the next question I was going to ask you, like in really high volume training, how do people keep up with eating enough? Like if we're doing the extreme of like, okay, I have to do fasted training and not really take things in while I'm running. It's like, okay, well, that's hours and hours of your day. Now, how are we going to like eat enough the rest of the day to kind of recover from that? It's just like the math sometimes just like can't work out for people. And that's where some of those like risk side effects can come into play. Um, yeah, I know. I'd argue like most of our clients are probably low carb when they come to work with us. And it's like, well, if it worked, you probably wouldn't be here. So, and it's just like maybe sometimes even unintentionally low carb because they're just under fueling.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a lot of nuance to the conversation, and I think yeah, there's always going to be outliers. Like applying the research to actual humans is so different than like giving us like a multiple choice question on a test. Like it's like it's so
Yeah.
different to look at a complex individual. Um, so
But
I
there
appreciate
are
you.
people who do this and it works really well for them, and they're doing like long races and this
Hmm.
and that. And as I said, like Zach was a great example because he did it very successfully and felt great. And but like I feel like he's just an example of someone who kind of like do lots of things because he's also doing great doing the carb thing. And
Right.
like what he was saying is like he kind of just felt like he reached his limit, his performance limit with this way of eating, and so he wanted to explore something else to see if he can do even better, right? So
Yeah.
I think everyone's at the end of the day, it's your body. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. You can feel however you want. If you want to give this a try, like fine. I wouldn't recommend it, but
Hmm.
I mean, it's up to
Right.
you what you do, and you just have to kind of play around. But I do think sometimes this kind of low carb way of eating, not always, but it's often playing into like the carb phobia and just like a
Yeah.
lot of this misinformation around nutrition that is going on, whether it's like the seed oil stuff or whatever else. It's like
Yeah.
often kind of all mixed into the same bucket. And often we find people who are low carb and intermittent fasting and low carb and doing, so it's like we just have to be really careful when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like the ability to burn fat more efficiently, like, is not necessarily something that's very complicated to train or like even necessary to train. Um, as we've been beating into our listeners, it is a lot harder to train your gut to tolerate more carbohydrates and like become more efficient at breaking down, carbohydrates and storing glycogen and those types of things. So a lot of the times, like even the argument of do low carb training and then like go high carb on race day It's like, well, I don't know if we want to do that. Like we need to make sure that your system's really primed to be able to handle that, or it's probably going to come with a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, my next question was kind of around like, fueling on a daily basis for ultra training. Like this is something that is hard for people, whether they're half marathon training, and then we kind of add the higher volume of ultra on top of it. Do you have any like kind of main like pain points that you tend to see people struggle with and any kind of like tips that you could give the listeners if they relate to that?
Yeah, it's really taking advantage of every single eating opportunity you possibly have. And so kind of like you were saying before, like the fasted training, it's like it's just gonna be really hard to catch up. Sometimes I see people barely fueling their morning workout, and then they're kind of like running late for work, and maybe they cram something in, but it's not enough, and then they're kind of getting caught up in whatever they're doing, or like they open their computer to like, oh, I'm just gonna check a couple emails, suddenly it's been like 2 hours, so it's really being very disciplined with your fueling the way that you are with training, because I'm sure you see this too. People are very disciplined with the training and less so with their
Mhm.
nutrition. And so I kind of have to go in and crack the whip and be like, okay, like you cannot do all this training if you're not going to take your nutrition seriously. And I know that's what you're paying me for, but like we really got to make it happen. And often we're dealing with lots of things. So it's more complex than just like, eat this. Okay, sure. It's like people are not used to eating this much. People are not hungry for more food. They're struggling to find the time. Another one I sometimes hear is like prioritizing it. Like especially if they're a caregiver, they have kids, like whatever's going on, they're working a lot. It's like, how can they make it a priority? And sometimes I really have to convince someone it's a priority. So there are a lot of things happening. If it's like an appetite thing, like I am such a huge fan of juice. I like with all my athletes, I'm like, if you're not drinking juice, then like we gotta work that in. And like, yeah, we could do like sports drink and stuff surrounding exercise, but we can work in 100% fruit juice all the other times. You get some micronutrients, it's yummy carbs, it's hydrating, it's great.
Yes.
And a lot of people are not doing this because like, oh my God, empty carbs, da 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 da,
Hmm.
and I'm like, no, 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 no. Juice is like your savior. You are gonna
Hmm.
love juice. I have like a whole juice regimen. I like I love my juice. So
Same.
so that's like juice is huge, other liquid nutrition. Making sure sometimes people are coming in just trying to reach their carbs and having all of the fiber. So like, hey, no, can we do like white rice? Can we do plain pasta? Can we like get rid of the bean-based pasta, whole wheat, all the stuff? Not to say like we of course still want you to be getting your fiber in, but when you have really high carbohydrate needs, like you're gonna get really full if you're going too hard on the fiber. So be careful there. And really just eating on a schedule, not waiting for hunger. Can we eat every 2 to 3 hours or so? And I think that one can be really hard for people when they're not used to eating this much. And then when you layer in the very common, but I'm afraid to gain weight, this is where the conversation gets even more complicated. Because they're like, why would I eat when I'm not hungry? Like, why would I do that? And yeah, so, and I know you just today posted a great post on like gaining weight while
Oh,
marathon
thanks.
training and this and that. And it's like, it's the same thing with ultra. It's like, I see this all the time that people are just, they come to me under fueling. Maybe they've been at suppressed weight. Their body's changing. It's really hard for them to handle that. They think it's going to affect performance. There's just like lots of stuff going on. But yeah, so I really just think like let's really max out our fueling before and after each workout, during if appropriate. So anything over an hour, I want you to fuel. If it's a higher intensity session, let's get some fuel in there. And then really snacking and eating quite regularly is going to help you.
I love that. I'm throwing a curveball at you too. This could probably be its own podcast episode, but based on our earlier conversation with your 80-year-old Boston marathoner,
Oh yeah.
does any of this change or anything extra layered on top for like masters athletes who are ultra
Mm.
running? Because I think right now too, there's like a dichotomy of like masters athletes like shouldn't be doing long distance events. They should be focusing on sprints and like these types of things. But of course, we have like this huge population who's like, but I like to go disappear in the woods for 5 hours,
Yes.
and that is my happy place. Can you speak to that at all as a masters athlete yourself?
You mean just like nutrition wise, what changes? Yeah.
Yeah, any changes at
Um,
all?
yeah, well, yeah, that is a huge topic.
I know. I'm
Um,
like, no, just like in the last minute,
no, no,
do
it's
the whole
okay. It's okay.
episode.
Let's do that little mini episode. I mean, this is where like so when it comes to performance nutrition, nothing really changes by your age. So like that's really it comes down to making sure you're still matching your intake to whatever activity you're doing. So when we think about kind of like carbohydrates and intra-workout fueling, like none of that really changes. Depending on how old you are, like when we say masters athletes, there's a really big difference between someone in their 40s and 50s and someone in their 70s and 80s. Like really in your
Totally.
70s and 80s, like that's where we can see like really big like thirst changes, B12 change. Like there's a whole host of like health situations like vitamin D, like we can make less vitamin D in the skin. Like there are all these different things that as you get older, maybe 60s, but more like 70s and 80s, that we're running into.
Mhm.
So that will depend, but like certainly like I have two mid 70-year-old men and an 80-year-old running Boston on Monday, which is super cool. I'm like
That's
I'm
so
awe of
cool.
them. They're great. And yeah, we have to, keep a lot of different things in mind when it comes to like recovery and getting what they need in and their fluid needs and we're for all three of them we're working on hydration because they don't always feel as thirsty. They're not always doing as good of a job there. So we're working on
Yeah.
hydration. Um, and yeah, protein, really making sure we're getting our protein in. That does increase as we age. But again, it's not so much like people are like really going crazy with the protein as we did a whole
Uh,
episode on protein, right? On my
yep.
podcast, which is coming out soon. Um, and and like, is it higher because you're older than you just being an athlete? It's like not really like it's not really changing so much. And we have to kind of keep in mind the individual and what else they're able to get in because I don't want you like going so hard on the protein because oh my God, I'm a master athlete, I have to get so much protein, and then you're not getting the carbs in and not getting other things that you need in. So again, we have to always like take the context into account. Um, but other things with masters athletes, yeah, I mean, I definitely think about hydration. I do think about protein. Intra-workout stays the same. I'm sure I'm missing a million things. But yeah, like calcium, making sure like you're getting your calcium in, your vitamin D, like, you know, and then as like for women kind of going their 40s and 50s, or that also, then the perimenopause, post-menopause thing happens, where it's just like, again, a whole other podcast.
Yep.
So I think I'll stop there because like there's just so much swirling around for masters athletes. I don't even know what else to say.
Yeah, but like my main point I think is like that you're trying to make too is like the carb loading is the same, the
Yes.
fueling during is the
Yep,
same.
yep, yep.
You can
Yeah.
still do ultra events if you're a
Yes.
master's athlete, like physiologically, like there's not like a switch that goes off overnight.
No.
It's like you can't tolerate this anymore.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
also it's yeah, it's very much remembering because I get people who yeah, maybe they're in their like 50s, 60s, 70s and they're like, "Oh, well, I don't need that much when I run, right? Because I'm older and my
right.
metabolism's." I'm like, "No, no, no, like we still need to match it to what you're doing." Like that
Yeah.
will always guide us, not your age necessarily. So if you are running an ultra marathon, a marathon, whatever you're doing, like we are still going to fuel appropriately for that. And
Yeah.
then we kind of then have to take into account. So like what, for instance, as an example, my three older marathon runners, like they have hypertension, they have this, and that, they have all these different chronic diseases that they're managing. And so we have to account for that. And we see that in a lot of masters athletes, whether you're in your 40s, 50s, whatever. But certainly when you're even older, then we often run into more issues. So it's more about kind of like that will usually play into more like the everyday stuff versus like
Yeah.
the intra-workout stuff. But we just have to kind of treat them as the whole human that they are, right?
Yeah, no, and again, like I know we're going into like a whole different podcast episode, but like I think that's important to bring up too. Like runners deal with medical complications. Like just because
Yeah.
you run doesn't mean you're just like immune to all of these things. Like I think there's a lot of stigma around like a runner with hypertension, a runner with diabetes, like a runner who has like high cholesterol, because it's like we hear from doctors that like the solution to those things is to exercise and eat healthy. Um, but it's like, well, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And just because you run marathons, ultra marathons, it doesn't mean you're immune to these things. And there's no
Yeah.
shame in that. So I love that you help people with that too, because yeah, you can just like take that stuff along for the ride and keep going.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. Like I mean, you have so many resources. I love your podcast. I'm biased. I've been
You.
on it, but like I love your podcast so much and all of the content that you share. Where can people go find you?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Eatforendurance.com. I'm Eat for Endurance on Instagram, the Eat for Endurance podcast. Those are kind of the main things for me. I don't do TikTok or any of the other stuff. But I have a blog that is packed with like really detailed posts on tons of different things. So if you're looking for, I don't actually think I have an ultra marathon specific blog post. I will probably write one soon. I have a triathlon one. I have a just all kinds of like what to eat before, during, and after long runs, all that kind of stuff. So I have that. I have lots of freebies on my website. I have a membership. I have coursework one-to-one with people. And my podcast has, gosh, I've had my podcast for over 6.5 years. So I have lots of content there if you're looking for anything. And Holly, you've been on there twice. So your second episode will be coming out soon. I'm not sure. I think very soon, actually. And of course, you came on to talk about body image too, which is a really awesome episode. So yeah,
Yeah, and then
I'm fine
protein,
if you want
which
to give me a follow.
yeah, but like Claire's podcast, guys, like she asked me to be on, she asked me about this specific topic, and like I took notes to like make sure I was prepared. It's not just like we're just gonna fill this with a bunch of fluff. It's like not just my episode, but all of her people's episodes are like so informative. So yeah, sit down with a pen and
Oh,
paper
thank you.
when you're listening.
Thank you. Thank
Because it
you.
is, I feel like more next level compared to some other nutrition podcasts out there that are just like fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very in depth. But thank you so much. I want to ask you the end of the podcast question as we wrap up here. So, say you're finishing like the race of your life. It could be an ultra event, it could be something else. What song would be playing to embody how you're feeling in that moment of triumph?
I was thinking about this. I'm like, oh God, what song? And the last, actually, it wasn't the last one, but it was a not so long ago 50K. I normally actually don't listen to music when I race, I will say, especially at the end, but I did bust out. It was Mount Tam 50K.
Mm.
And it was really hard 50K. And it was so beautiful though. And I was like, just like bombing down a hill. And and I had like a little playlist, and This Is Me by The Greatest Showman came on, and it was just like I was like, hell yeah. I was just, you're just like get that adrenaline, you're just like, ah,
Yeah.
it's like bombing down there. That probably, so I think that would be my song.
That's a good one. No one said The
It's such a
Greatest
good
Showman
song. It's such a
soundtrack.
good, The Greatest Showman is just
So
fantastic.
good. It's
Yeah,
so
that Come
good.
Alive and This
Yes.
Is Me both came on when I was like going down this endless hill, and I was like, I might die because I'm gonna
You're
like
like
slip
barreling.
and fall. Oh yeah. And there were so many routes, and I'm like, I'm not being careful. I am just going for it. It was great.
Well, the
And then
music,
the song finished, and I really hurt.
yeah, the music clearly protected you,
Yes.
as the
Yes.
studies show. I think I still say to this day, like I have been to, like my favorite concerts have been like my Taylor Swift concerts because I'm such a huge fan.
Mhm.
But one of the most entertaining concerts I ever went to was a Hugh Jackman concert. He came to
Oh wow.
Boston and it was just he's so talented. Like he's
Yeah,
singing like his like kind of Broadway sets that he's been on for like Beauty and the Beast. He's singing The Greatest Showman. He's doing Les Mis. He's like telling jokes in between. Like the man is so
that's
talented. I loved it so much. I always like bring that up because I feel like, I don't know, he doesn't really do that anymore, but it was really fun like a couple years ago when I went to see Hugh Jackman.
very cool. Very cool. I did not. Taylor Swift would probably like it would be some Taylor Swift song next, but I actually either that or it'd be I like a lot of like electronic dance music
Hmm.
and like just some sort of like loud, crazy song. I don't know. Nothing comes to mind, but yeah. But I
Yes.
did not go to Taylor Swift. I'm so upset. I wish I had.
I bit the
I came
bullet
to
and
it very
went,
late.
and it
I
was
came to
so
it.
worth it.
Yeah, no, I kind of became a bigger fan of Taylor Swift when like the Eras tour was already like really underway and I was learning
Yeah.
more about it. And then like it was
That makes me so
basically
happy
almost
though.
over. It was almost over. I remember I was like, can I go to the very last one in was it
Vancouver.
in Vancouver? Yeah, I was like, can I
Yeah.
make this happen? I'm like, no, I cannot make this happen.
Yeah. You're like, wait, looks at bank account.
Yeah,
Probably
no, yeah.
not.
Nope, nope, cannot spend that
Yeah.
money. But I did watch the documentary afterwards and I was like, oh my God, this is insane.
It's so
So
good.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, as a lifelong fan, like since her first release, just because I grew up with her and loved country
Yeah.
music too, like that makes me so happy. Like that people are fans now because of the Eras tour. Because I'm just like, yes, come. It's really great over here. We have so much fun. It's like really,
Yeah.
really, really fun fandom.
Yeah, and my kids are obsessed. So I kind of had to
Oh,
put like a stop on Taylor Swift for a little while because we were like listening to it so much. I was
yeah,
like, I can't listen to it for a little while.
yeah.
But yeah, for
That's
sure.
awesome. Well, she's runner up. That's good. We'll take Hugh Jackman as the first. Or This Is Me at least from The Greatest Showman. But thank you so much for coming on the show. This was
Yeah.
just like so much wisdom. So I really hope people go check you out to learn more.
Thank you for having me. This is super fun.